So what I want to talk about is where we've come from a little bit on workforce management and the sort of traditional pressures that, if you think about workforce management, come up. So one of the most obvious ones when we're looking at scheduling and forecasting in workforce management is labour not aligned with demand. That's one of the key ones for workforce management. And be that in healthcare, nurses to patient ratio, or in retail where we're looking at cashiers, stock, people on the floor, merchandising. A lot of organisations trying to work out how many people they should have, where and when. That's traditionally food and drink to workforce management. But then on the sort of pay side, exposure to risk and paying people properly. So compliance has always been one of the reasons for time attendance part of workforce management, and that's not going away. I think that's going to stay. But historically, those first two, it's either one or both of those were the reason that you were looking at workforce management. The last one, quite often the business case for workforce management is cost, historically. It's been about trying to reduce the amount of wastage in the system from a workforce management point of view, make better use of your resources. In some parts of the world where minimum wages have been going up, which is quite a topic at the moment, minimum wages going up actually means that the number of resources is going down. So organisations have that issue of trying to do more, or at least the same, with less resource because of the minimum wage issue. So that's where we've come from. Now, I say over the last sort of 3 years especially, things are changing, and they're changing much quicker than they have done before, especially in the sphere of workforce management. And I've identified these three key areas really. The first one about the workforce, which we've heard some about this morning, about well-being and how there's a different relationship between employers and employees now than there was 5 or even 10 years ago. But also changing from a very hierarchical structure in an organisation to much more of a matrix structure. So, and that could be a mix of both people who work for you and people who don't work for you, non-direct workforce. And that is causing some big problems in workforce management for organisations. How do they mix their contractors, agency and their own staff? And the environment. And this environment in this case is regulatory, mostly. If you spend any time on the continent, in Germany, for example, this year they've just introduced new minimum wage laws. It's become very complicated actually to work out whether you're paying somebody the right amount or not, in Germany specifically. And in France, there's lots of works councils. The UK, we do have some union rules, not nearly as much as those two countries. But also, organisations are taking parts that are organising and outsourcing. Some of my friends from outsourcing are here. But also, this is sort of changing the way the workforce management needs to adapt. So it needs to be different than it was before. You can't simply have a workforce management system that worked 5 years ago, doesn't necessarily match what you need today or tomorrow. So let's talk about the 5 things that I've found. And here they are in no particular order, apart from the first one, which is probably the easiest one to identify and the easiest one to quantify, is the regulatory environment. We're slightly less litigious here in Europe than they are in the US, but Walmart, Wells Fargo, some of those big organisations have had some really huge class action suits, 600 million, I think it was, for Walmart, because they weren't enforcing people's breaks. Yeah, and that really, I've in the last sort of 2 years, I've been speaking more with finance directors than ops managers. And when finance directors are talking about workforce management, you know there's something different going on. And that really is about regulatory. We've talked a little about non-payroll, so outsourcing. What we see a lot in retail is some of those key functions that used to be part of the organisation are now outsourced to somebody else. And there's a couple of different reasons for that, which we'll talk about. Workforce demographic was talked about this morning a little bit. We've got a different type of employee now than we had 10 years ago. The millennials, this wonderful term of millennials. And that brings different pressures to how you interact. How do you schedule people? What sort of influence do they want to have on the process, which is much different now than it was even 5 years ago. And how do we cope with that? And that sort of runs into my next one, which is innovation and communication. Historically, workforce management has all been about, here is your schedule. There you are, you go and work that, that's fine. And then we'll work out how much you should be paid for it. That's not the way now. It's not the way organisations want to work, because that's not the way their employees want to work. And the last one, and this, as I said, never goes away, is increasing pressure on resource. So better forecasting, better planning, and better scheduling is one of those key things in workforce management you'd expect to see on the list there. So let's go through them one at a time in a bit more detail. In the, so this one's probably the easiest one to quantify. Works councils and CBAs, most of your organisations probably operate in more than one territory. And operating in more than one territory, even if that's not across borders, but it might be you've had staff who've cheaped in, you might have grown by acquisition, you have different people on different sets of rules and conditions. And making sure that people are paid correctly was always the drive behind time and attendance, especially. But now the focus has flipped a little bit. Yes, you've got to pay people correctly, but also you've got to make sure that your organisation isn't exposed to risk. And that risk comes from, if you've got a big estate with lots of managers doing lots of scheduling and lots of time and attendance, are they enforcing the rules and the compliance correctly? If they're not, and there's always going to be a range of abilities when people are looking at scheduling and time and attendance, if they're not doing a good job, the company is exposed to enormous risk, like Walmart found out, like Wells Fargo found out. So we've not only got to deal with that complexity from territory to territory, but also the complexity of your organisation. And we're finding, especially on the continent, the interpretation of the regulations is a whole task in itself. In Germany, I'm dealing with two different retailers, ostensibly the same, but they're interpreting the minimum wage law two different ways. Yeah, so no longer is it a simple, this is this and this is this. Until it goes to court, we won't know exactly which one of them is right, which is scary. But a lot of the companies we're dealing with now, this is one of their main drivers. Yeah, it isn't about paying people correctly, it's about making sure they're not exposed to risk. This clicker doesn't want to work. Non-payroll. There's a research company out of Toronto called Cube Research, you might have come across. They say that within 5 years, 50% of the people who work for you will not be paid by you. They'll be paid by somebody else. And that brings a lot of challenges in a workforce management context, not because you're not paying them, but how do you schedule them? How do you make sure that your direct and non-direct workforce are working together? And some good examples of the outsourcing in retail, if you walk into a store, quite often you'll see an end plate which has got some great big promotion on, which is great. Go and buy this product because it's cheap. Now the retailers often have an incentive from that brand to put that product there. And the organisation know that if that product is not put there the way that the brand wanted, the brand will take away the incentive they gave the organisation. So rather than paying £100,000 for that produce, they'll say, well, we'll give you the produce for $50,000 if you put it on the end plate. But then if it's not put on the end plate correctly, and the store next to the FD or the CEO of the company, he goes into the store and it's not there, they rip out that incentive. So there's two parts to that. There's one, is this retailer, is their main business putting stuff on shelves? Probably not. Do you want your staff putting stuff on shelves? Probably not. So we'll get somebody else to do that who's more skilled at that. But secondly, it's also about transfer of risk. Because if I've outsourced that to somebody else, it's their risk then if they don't do that correctly, rather than my risk. And we're seeing that in lots of sectors. We're seeing it in healthcare quite a bit as well. I know there's been, just this week, they've reduced the amount that hospitals can spend on agency, but there's quite a lot of that happening as well. It's transferring of risk, not just transferring of personnel. And the problem you've got in workforce management is, if you think of like a retail department store, they've been doing this for years. The department stores have pods inside, like the beauty houses, all have their own consultants. They're not affiliated to the department store at all. And it used to be they just took care of themselves. The department store didn't care who came and went as long as there was a body there to sell the produce. That's changed now. Again, the risk now is that the department store has to track those people as well, has to make sure they're compliant because they're on their premises. And that never used to be the case until very recently. And that's only because of the Americans and their lawsuits that organisations are now changing. So systems that were homegrown that dealt with just our staff, now we've got to deal with all those staff as well. And that's tricky. My favourite one, millennials. Millennials, someone who's born, between 95 and 2002 or something, I think is the definition of a millennial. I'm not one of those. But the difference with millennials isn't quite what we think. What we're finding in a lot of organisations is that millennials who are coming into the business are less loyal to that brand. So they turn over quicker. And that creates a problem when you're trying to plan across 6 months, 9 months, 12 months out. How many people will you have in your estate? Yeah, a lot of organisations are dealing with lots of vacancies. So how do they make sure that the people they're recruiting are likely to stay longer? So this isn't strictly a workforce management issue, but it has knock-on effects in workforce management. So there's a drive now to look at how do we recruit people and retain people who are going to perform well in my business. And again, that's different than, especially in some of the high turnover where it was just people in, people out, people in, people out. There's much more focus on that particular cost than there has been. But those millennials also are demanding a different role within the business. Again, it used to be, as I said, you'd have a schedule that's printed out, you take it home, pin it on the fridge, that's what you're working. Millennials don't want to work like that. They want to have a say in their shift. They want to have a say on what skills they work. They want to say, I'd like to do this and not that. I'd like to work there and not here. I'd like to have control over swapping shifts with each other. And that becomes a big problem if you've got systems which aren't designed to cope with that sort of flexibility. And wrapped up in this one as well is also training. If you've got a high turnover, you've got a high training bill. But also, we're at a stage now where a lot of the baby boomers and some of the Gen Xs are retiring, and there's all that tenured information, all that knowledge is leaving the business. So in this little area of millennials, we've also got succession planning, learning planning, training planning, all happening, which is all impacting the amount of bodies you've got doing the job you want to be done in workforce management. So it's also almost before workforce management is where the problem starts, but it impacts in workforce management when you haven't got the people you need on the floor. Work-life balance, that unlike some of us who've been around in the business community for a bit longer, who've worked ourselves to death, worked all the hours, millennials don't want to do that, and quite rightly. If they come in early today, they want to go home early on Friday. And systems have to be able to cope with the fact that they want to do that, and not dock them pay because they go home early on Friday. So they're really changing the flexibility. It has to be much more agile to deal with all these different inputs and all these different things that are going on. Which leads into this one. This is really almost the same subject. 3, 4, 5 years ago, there was a silver bullet for communication, which was an app. Every vendor on the market had an app, and that app would solve all your communication problems. That's not true. It's never worked. What really, if you think a lot of business are multi-channel, communication needs to be multi-channel as well. So should you get an SMS to say what your shift is? Should you be able to ring a phone number and using IVR, using your keypad, ask to swap shifts, ask for some overtime, request vacation? Should you be able to use a smartphone to do all that stuff? If your internet's got, if your fridge has got an internet connection, you should be able to do it on your fridge. That's the way that millennials are thinking about this process. But also, the collaboration part is also in social collaboration. Our millennials and our people who are working now want to be able to have complete visibility of this whole process. You can't have black box solutions now where you press a button and get an answer and they just walk away with the answer. At every step of this process, there needs to be more involvement with employees than there's ever been. And that's difficult because who works the Friday night shift? No one wants to work the Friday night shift. So how can you enforce that people are still covering your business the way you want the business to be covered, but also deal with all this stuff as well? And communication is the key. Communicate 1,000% more than you think you have to for anything to do with workforce management and scheduling now. And the exclusions part, more and more organisations now are thinking about blackouts and greyouts. So when employees are requesting vacation is a good example, the system will say no. So rather than going to an HR person, to an ops manager, to somebody else to say, we're already a bit close on that day, or it's Black Friday, therefore we can't have anybody off, the systems now need to do more of that for you. But also in a more predictive way as well. It needs to be able to say, if this trend continues, in 2 months, you're going to have a problem. Traditionally, workforce management's been about what happened yesterday and what's going to happen tomorrow, and a bit about today. But now it's more about, I need to know now if I've got a problem in 2 months. So we're seeing much more demand on systems to be more predictive. Everyone's talking about big data. I hate the term big data, but predictive analytics is probably a better term. Look at the data you've got and look forward and see if there's going to cause you a problem. And do something about it before it happens. And that's, again, a big part of what people are telling us. Which comes into this bit, which is the forecasting and planning. Again, we're being asked to do more with less. All the time we're being asked to do more with less. Not only in a demand aspect, so for example for a retailer it's quite obvious Christmas is busier, they hire some more seasonal temps, that makes a lot of sense. But in a lot of organisations who are looking at a budgetary process across the year, they think that 1 week they might be a bit down, 1 week they might be a bit up, but by the end of the period, end of the year, it'll probably all be about right. Because of the speed that a lot of these businesses are changing, you can't take that view anymore. You can't take it'll probably all work out in the end view. The systems have to be much more precise and give you data much quicker. So you'll see someone with an iPad. But looking at how demand is forecasted, look at how schedules are forecasted, and the big thing that everyone forgets in the labour supply strain is that labour is seasonal as well. Because in summer, we all want to go off on holiday. Yeah, but a lot of systems don't take that into consideration. It's a sort of a hidden, it'll all work out in the end. And we can't do that anymore. We've got to take action to make sure that everything in the future is going to be all right. And in the labour supply strain as well, goes back to what we're talking about with recruiting and retaining the right people. If your attrition rate, or your turnover is 40%, yeah, and the impact that has on the quality that you can produce, your labour supply is actually absolutely key. And in a lot of organisations, labour supply isn't thought of as a resource. It's thought of as we just have people, and people are here and people do the job. There's a lot more focus now on really thinking of people as a real resource, not just people who turn up. So that's my 5. You'll tell me at the end if there's any you're going to add on to this. But workforce management is designed to deal with all this. It's designed to do with those things that we know we can do. Workforce management has to do. So it has to be proactive, it has to have constraints, it has to be automated, it has to get rid of the variability that one manager might do something good and one manager does something bad. It has to level the playing field. And almost that's a bit of a given, to be honest, in my opinion. What is more of a problem is being able to adapt. So if you bought a piece of software today, next week, your requirement will be different. Next month, next year. Your requirement is always changing. So being able to adapt is one of the keys. And it's not just a workforce management problem. One of the key things we see out there is the fact that you've got all these different systems all doing what they should do, but how are you getting that consistency? How are you making sure that your recruitment plan is feeding into your HR system, which is feeding into your workforce management, so that you know you're going to have the right resource in 6 months' time? How are these things linked? And you've got to think, learning management on the far right there. How does my learning impact my talent? How does my talent impact my workforce management? Have I got the analytics that are going to show me where I'm going to be in the future? This was titled Dramatic Changes to Workforce Management, but I think if there's one thing which is the biggest dramatic change in workforce management, it's no longer a point solution. It's no longer an isolated pillar of the business. It needs to be much more integrated with all your processes than it ever has been. So one of the key ones, which I didn't put up, number 6 of the list is you've got to think about the whole process. Workforce management alone will solve some of those obvious ones, but some of the less obvious ones it really can't cope with on its own. It needs to be more integrated with everything else that you're doing in that process. So these are some of the things that we quite often come back to, is that the system has to do all these things for you as workforce management. Let's talk about workforce management again. It has to do all these things for you, but it can't do it alone. That's key. It really can't do it alone anymore. Historically, workforce management has been a very separate tool, and that, I don't believe, is the case anymore. And I think I've got about 6 minutes left, so I've probably rambled on a bit there. So that's me. I've got 6 minutes for you to throw things at me, rotten fruit, tin fruit, whatever you brought with you. Any questions? That normally, by the way, we take about 2 hours over, so it's been a quick one.